Do you want to make your art compositions more successful? Of course you do. And in this lesson, I'm going to share an easy technique called the rule of thirds that you can apply to your drawings and paintings to make them more aesthetically successful. Hello there everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this lesson I'm going to share with you a technique that you can apply to your drawings and paintings to make them more aesthetically successful. Now, of course, this technique is dealing with composition, and composition refers to the way the elements or subjects are laid out on the picture plane in your drawings and paintings. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to take a look at several different examples. We're going to take a look also at some things to watch out for, because you can't just be tied to one compositional technique. There are flaws to every compositional technique, and we're going to cover a few of those here in this lesson. So let's go ahead and take a look at the rule of thirds. So we'll start here with just a blank screen, and I want you to imagine that this blank screen is your drawing paper or your canvas. We're going to start by dividing the surface down into thirds. We'll start with a couple of vertical lines here, and then we'll add a couple of horizontal lines as well. Now, each one of these sections is basically a third of your drawing paper or your canvas. You can see that we've divided it by thirds, both horizontally and vertically. Now, we can notice that the locations where the horizontal lines and the vertical lines intersect, we have these points. These points are excellent locations to place subjects of importance, like your focal point within the scene. But just showing you some lines and showing you some points is really not going to help you too much. Let's look at some practical examples and take a look at how we can use the rule of thirds to make our compositions a little bit more successful. We'll start by taking a look at this photo of a lighthouse, and let's imagine that you were going to draw or paint this lighthouse. Now, this composition is fairly strong on its own, but let's see if we can improve it using our knowledge of the rule of thirds. The first thing we'll do is we'll crop our image down to a more horizontal composition, and we'll also layer over the top our grid. And you can see here that in this case, the lighthouse lines up with one of the intersecting points on the lower right-hand corner. You'll also notice that our horizon line also is in alignment with the bottom third. Now, this is using the rule of thirds here, and this composition is okay, but it still feels visually heavy at the bottom. Now, you might choose to do a composition like this if you're wanting to put emphasis on the sky. But in this particular case, the sky is rather bland. There's not a lot of interest there, and that's why this composition feels a little heavy towards the bottom of the picture plane. Let's see if we can improve it, again using the rule of thirds. First, we'll go back to our original photo and take a look at it again, just for reference purposes. Now we've cropped the image to be more of a square composition. Now let's lay our grid over the top and take a look at where our elements line up in this composition. When we lay the grid over the top, we can see that our lighthouse is now moved up to the upper right-hand corner. We had those two intersecting lines, and of course, that's a good place to put a subject of importance. But we also notice that in the foreground, we also have our mound of rocks that also lies within two of the intersecting lines. In this case, this composition is more successful than the original photo, and it's more successful than the example we just looked at. Now, let's look at another example. We'll next take a look at a portrait. Now, this photo is a wonderful photo. We've got some great things that are happening in the background. We have that dark tree in the upper right-hand corner that's creating some nice contrast. We have wonderful light that's happening in the background, but our subject is positioned right in the center of the picture plane. This is more of a static composition. Let's see if we can improve it using our knowledge of the rule of thirds. We'll first crop the image down, and we'll do so with the knowledge of the rule of thirds in mind. This means that we're going to position the figure over on the right side of the picture plane and allow the background to fill up most of the left side of the picture plane. Now, since this figure is positioned with her body facing the left side of the picture plane, we'll allow the left side of the picture plane to be filled up with the background. You can imagine if she was positioned on the right side of the picture plane, it would feel a little bit awkward because her body would be facing away from the rest of the information. Now let's go ahead and lay a grid over the top. Now, when we lay a grid over the top of this composition, you'll notice that I've positioned the figure to be in alignment with the vertical line on the right side of the picture plane. You'll notice that this line goes right through the top of her head, all the way down her body and off the bottom of the picture plane. You'll also notice that I've positioned the eyes to be in alignment with the top horizontal line. We're naturally drawn to the eyes of any subject that we draw, of course. It has to be subjects that have eyes, so this deals with people and animals. So it makes sense that this is going to be a natural focal point within the picture plane. Now, you'll also notice that we have an intersecting point up there in the upper right-hand corner, and her right eye is in alignment with this. So based on what we know about the rule of thirds and applying it to this particular composition, we've improved the original composition. We'll next take a look at an animal as our subject, and this is a wonderful photo on its own, but let's see if we can improve the composition by using the rule of thirds. We'll first go ahead and lay a grid over the top of this image and crop it down a bit. And you can see in this case, I've laid a grid over the top and I've cropped it so that the animal's eye is in alignment with one of those intersecting points. We can see this here. But there are some clear problems with this composition. First of all, you'll notice that the body goes off the picture plane on the right side at kind of an awkward place. We know that that ear continues off, but just a little bit off the picture plane. And there's a lot of negative space on the right side of the picture plane as well. So just because we're using the rule of thirds here, this doesn't necessarily improve the composition because we have some other compositional issues. Let's see if we can improve the composition while still using our knowledge of the rule of thirds. This time I've moved the body of the dog so it's still in alignment with one of the thirds, the vertical line on the left side of the picture plane. But you'll notice the dog is positioned in a slightly different manner. The eye is not on one of those intersecting points. You'll also notice that now we have enough negative space on the left side of the picture plane around that ear, so we're not feeling a lot of visual weight on that side. Instead, it feels more visually balanced. We still have a lot of negative space on the left side of the picture plane, but again, it's still visually balanced. That negative space on the right side helps to balance out the positive space on the left side of the picture plane. So here we've used the rule of thirds to improve the composition while keeping in mind other compositional elements that are still important to creating an aesthetically successful composition. Now, let's look at another example. Here we have another portrait. Now, do you think that we can improve this composition by using the rule of thirds? Let's give it a shot. We'll first crop the image down based on our knowledge of the rule of thirds. This composition is fairly successful as well. If we lay a grid over the top, we can see that the eyes are in alignment with the top horizontal line, and the bulk of her figure is in alignment with the vertical line on the right side of the picture plane. But is it really better than our original composition? When we go back to our original composition, we'll notice some things happening in the background. In this particular case, we have some almost circular elements that are happening back there. We have some leaves and we have some shadows, and it almost seems like these have been manipulated to a certain degree to create more of a circular movement around the figure. This actually puts more focus on the face of the subject, and it also helps that the subject is positioned in the center portion of the picture plane. In this case, I feel like this composition is stronger as it is, instead of cropping it down and using the rule of thirds. So it's important to note that although we have the rule of thirds at our disposal, it's not always necessary to use in every drawing or painting that we create. Now, let's take a look at a few examples of how artists have used the rule of thirds in their compositions. Let's first take a look at this landscape painting by Albert Brito. You'll notice if we lay a grid over the top, we have an element of importance, the focal point, that lies in the intersecting points in the lower left-hand corner. We see a small building there, we see trees, we see a couple of figures. You'll also notice that the lower third, the lower horizontal third, is in alignment with the horizon line. Now, let's take a look at another example. Next, we'll take a look at this landscape painting by John Singer Sargent. Now, Sargent was a master at composition, and we can see why in this painting. In this painting, he's used the rule of thirds to position certain elements within the scene to make a more aesthetically successful composition. If we layer a grid over the top, we can see that in the upper right-hand corner, we have the crashed airplane, which falls on one of the intersecting points. And in the lower left-hand corner, we can see that the figures we see in the foreground also are in alignment with one of the intersecting points within the picture plane. Let's take a look at another example. This painting by Delacroix is fairly dramatic, but let's see how Delacroix used the rule of thirds to create an aesthetically successful composition. If we lay a grid over the top based on the rule of thirds, we can see that the boat and the main area of focus is in alignment with the lower horizontal line. We'll also notice that Christ is very close to an intersecting point in the lower left-hand corner. This, of course, creates a more aesthetically successful composition. And now for another example. In the self-portrait by Cezanne, we can see that he also used the rule of thirds to create a more successful composition. You'll notice that the bulk of the body is in alignment with the vertical line on the left side of the picture plane, and the eyes are also in alignment with the top horizontal line within the picture plane. The rule of thirds works for virtually any subject matter that you encounter. In this painting by Van Gogh, we can see that Van Gogh also used the rule of thirds to create a more aesthetically successful composition. If we lay a grid over the top, we can see that the blue ginger container on the right side of the picture plane is in alignment with the right vertical line. And we'll also notice that the bulk of the apples within the scene are in alignment with the lower horizontal line within the picture plane as well. This, of course, leads to a more successful composition. The rule of thirds also works for abstract or non-objective pieces. In this work by Kandinsky, we can see that he's positioned most of the visually heavy elements in alignment with the left vertical line within the picture plane. We can also see the circle at the bottom left-hand corner is very close to that intersecting point with the bottom horizontal line. So as you can see, the rule of thirds is an excellent and easy way to improve your artistic compositions. But you also have to keep in mind that it doesn't work for every subject, and when you try to force it to work, sometimes that can lead to less successful compositions. So you have to keep other compositional theories in mind if you do decide to apply it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you out. I'd like to remind you, if you'd like to check out 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free over at thevirtualinstructor.com, you can do so. There's a link in the description below. We also have a fantastic membership program that includes video courses, ebooks, live lessons, lesson plans for teachers, and much, much more. Again, there'll be a link in the description below if you want to check that out. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We cover a broad variety of drawing and painting subjects and techniques on this channel. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it helped you out. And as always, I wish you all the very best in your artistic success.